Hello and welcome to the i3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I am Julie Graham. Tonight, on this balmy evening, after our snow-related postponement just 5 weeks ago, we welcome Andrew Prokos. Andrew is a fine art and architecture photographer whose work incorporates architectural elements and sweeping natural and urban views. His large-scale compositions are often constructed from multiple high-definition images, which enables him to capture an exceptional level of quality, detail and clarity in the prints that he produces for collectors and corporate clients worldwide. Andrew's work has been widely published in both print and online, including Aceline Books, Casa Vogue, CNN Arabic, Corriere della Sera, Design Boom, Digital Photographer, Harper's Bazaar Art, and D-Zine, where I think I first saw your work about 15, 16 years ago. Andrew has received honors from the Prix de la Photographie, the International Photography Awards, American Photography, Latin American Photographia, and Neutral Density. And his work has been exhibited at leading institutions such as the Museum of the City of New York, 2121 Design Site in Tokyo, Banco de Brazil Culture Space, and the Palm Spring Art Museum's Modernism Week, as well as in galleries and corporate collections throughout the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. So, worth the wait. Let's have a warm welcome.
Thank you, Julie. It's greatly appreciated, and I just wanted to extend my thanks also to Tom and to Marco, he's not here tonight, but he came up with the beautiful promotional graphics for social media and things like that. And of course to all of you, because some of you may have booked a month and a half ago, and this is your second visit here, so it's greatly appreciated to see you here. So I've prepared what I hope is an entertaining lecture. At least it has a lot of pretty pictures for you. And at the end of the talk, I hope to have given you some insight into the concepts and creation of my work. So without further ado, let's jump into it here. So a little background about myself for those of you who may not be familiar with my work. I've been a professional photographer for a little over 20 years now. And I was an avid amateur for a full decade before that. So I worked in many different professions before I decided to jump full-time into photography. The core of my business these days is fine art sales to an international clientele, and I'm taking on fewer commercial shoots than I used to early in my career. Earlier in my career, it was really more about the commercial side of things, and I was slowly developing my archive, but these days it's really kind of flipped. So as you can see here, I specialize in large-scale photographs which are sold as framed limited editions up to about 250 inches, and that's for the cityscapes. So generally the other pieces are sold at a bit of a smaller size, a manageable size, but the cityscapes can be quite large. So you're going to see in this presentation how that's accomplished, and I think Julie alluded to a bit in her opening, but I'll discuss it further. So at the risk of it sounding a bit like a sales pitch, which I don't want to do, I do want to delve a little bit into what my daily routine is. So every piece that I produce is custom work, pretty much. And I'm using gallery quality materials, museum grade papers, of course, solid wood framing, and the museum acrylic that costs an arm and a leg. And you have to take a mortgage out on the house, but it makes a huge difference in all these pieces. And it makes a huge difference for the people who have them in their homes. So over the years, I've learned to just go for it and use the best quality materials in my work. I do personally inspect and approve every single print personally, and the framed artwork again before it goes out of the studio. That's all extra work, of course. If you're to the younger photographers here, it's about commitment. So that is how you're going to get ahead in photography. That's how you're going to have a gratifying life. You have to be committed. And that means sometimes a lot of extra work that you would sometimes like to skip. So creativity is paramount, of course, but But if it isn't executed well, then you aren't really sticking the landing, for lack of a better term. So there are two parts to it. You know, there's the creative input, and then the output also has to match that. And there's a lot going on there behind the scenes. And trusted vendors also play a big role in this. So my day-to-day routine is not so much about glamorous studio shoots, influencer campaigns, or running around the streets of New York with a Leica around my neck. I wish I could. It's a more patient, methodical production process, day to day. And of course, the larger the pieces get, I think this one is about 90, this was 96 inches, it becomes even more of a patient process. So why am I so controlling about the process side of things? At these, first of all, very important to realize at these sizes, every mistake shows, every single mistake. But also, more importantly, each piece is an advertisement for my work, and it really needs to speak for itself when I'm not present there. In the end, it's really all about what kind of life you want, and I enjoy a life of making tangible, beautiful artworks that people want as a focal point in their home. Even after all these years, I've been selling since 2004. I still consider it an honor every time somebody places an order with me. And it is. They're trusting you. And you're delivering something that they really have high expectations. And it has a place of honor in their home. And so that, to me, that's still an honor. It's very gratifying to create a physical product like this that has heft and is durable, and you have to sweat to pick it up and move it and to deliver it, and it doesn't just exist as pixels. All right, so due to the limited time tonight, I chose to focus on more recent work, but you can read more about my early days and how I got started in photography in the articles on my website. I have a devoted page here. It includes the stories about how I arrived in New York at 20, a naive kid from Florida, to start grad school in political science, because my degree was not in the arts. And I ended up on a radically different path in photography instead. Never looked back. All right, so I have a large archive of images on my website. They're sorted into collections by genre and location. It spans 20 years, of course, of film and digital capture. I was shooting film for many, many years before I switched to digital. In fact, I'm a little bit stubborn. I'm a creature of habit, and it took me a long time to start shooting digital because I didn't really feel like I needed it. All of these images here span all the different camera formats as well. Hi, welcome. I'm going to discuss one of the camera formats a little bit later on, the panoramic camera. So we'll start here with black and white. I've kind of paired similar images for you to keep it a little bit more interesting. So often these images start in color and they're converted to black and white. My older work was all shot on black and white negative film. Interestingly, I never shot color negative film. I never liked it. I shot color chrome, but the black and whites were shot on negative film. Black and white, of course, has a reductive power. I use that to strip away anything that isn't really essential and focus on the form and the tonality of the image. It's not always quite a minimalist approach with my work, but it's generally more so than with my color work. One constant in my work is capturing details, often very close up. This one's 8 Spruce Street. I don't know, you probably know this building. So what's my intent with shooting this type of work? It's not really to faithfully represent or depict the building as is, which is the realm of commercial photography, which we're going to visit a little bit later on in the presentation. It's really to elevate the depiction of architecture into the realm of fine art. What I want to do is show people when they're passing this building on their day-to-day, something that they may not have seen passing the building, something completely new. Close-up helps a lot with that. With these close-up details, I break the building up into component parts and find the most compelling aspects to isolate and present them all on their own. If done well, they stand completely on their own as artwork, relying on chiaroscuro, texture and form, and any combination of those to make a bold statement. So times when I'm shooting this type of work, I feel like I'm hunting, and the photographers in the room probably know what I'm talking about. I have no history with hunting in real life, but when I have the camera, I'm out there stalking the image, and I'm going to get that prey in the bag before I get home tonight. And I think I've discussed it enough with other photographers where I think that's a very common sentiment. We're out hunting. We want our prize by the time we come home. So here we have a slightly different type of work. It brings all the previous factors into play, but we're marrying it to long exposure times. In this case, these are 4-minute long exposures. This is a 6-minute long exposure. So here I'm finding the most interesting perspective to create drama in the composition, and the long exposure time adds another layer of sentiment to the image. The softening of the clouds, the softening of the water, it gives the image a dreamlike quality. This can also be applied to cityscapes, of course. This is a long exposure view created from 4 10-minute long exposures, 40 minutes of total elapsed exposure time. Again, the scene has an ethereal quality to it. Where exactly is the light coming from here? It's non-directional. It's kind of suffusing the image. Moving on, completely different animal. This is the stunning Gothic revival facade at 90 West Street. This is Cass Gilbert, one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. And so I wanted to portray this a little bit differently. I wanted to have a kind of very high contrast historical reference, and I decided to just capture it straight on with a very flat perspective and top to bottom view of the building. This was, I must admit, intended to be part of a much larger series of kind of the Grand Dame buildings of New York, which hasn't happened yet, but slowly I'm getting there, and one day it will form a complete series. But in any case, you can see it here. This was in an exhibition of my architectural photography in New Orleans. I shot this unique view of the city for the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. They publish a beautiful book annually devoted to a different American city, and this was for the New York book. And this actually didn't get used on the cover. We used a nighttime shot in color, but I'm showing you this specifically because, for the students in the room, when you do get your commercial work, you should always be looking for the opportunity to include something that you can use for fine art. The client generally doesn't know and doesn't care, and you might never be in that location again. It's very hard to get into these locations. It takes the client to arrange it. Take the opportunity, focus on your work, but take the opportunity to create things for yourself as well. And you never know what might come to pass later on. So here we're looking at black and white landscapes. This is from my series Dunescapes. This was shot in the Liwa Desert on the border with Saudi Arabia. So Liwa has the highest desert dunes anywhere in the world. It's pristine and a bit otherworldly to be shooting there. I thought it was a complete privilege. It's one of those places where, since it's so silent, you really you kind of lose yourself in where you are, and that doesn't happen very often to me. But if you've seen the Dune series, Dune 1 and 2, and I think the third one's coming out, all the Arrakis scenes were shot here in Liwa. It takes quite a bit of scouting to find the best locations for this kind of work. You have to drive for hours, 4.5 hours. This was my driver for that series right here in the front row. From Abu Dhabi, it took about 4.5 hours through an endless highway, and at some point you just have to leave the car because it's going to get stuck, and carry your equipment through the sand, and hopefully you're not there in summer, which I wasn't. So it wasn't so tough. Here we have a pair of color architectural scenes. These are Calatrava buildings. I paired the Oculus here that we all know with another oculus in one of his buildings in Dubai in the UAE pavilion. I love his work. I'm a sucker for this tonality because it really is kind of the light color palette I find uplifting. I've shot a lot of museum interiors. This one at the left is the Louvre Abu Dhabi. Now it's, at the time I shot it, it really wasn't that famous, but now it's like super famous. And it's really a masterpiece of contemporary architecture. The way that the elements are brought into the museum, I don't know of any other museum that brings the elements right to the artwork like that. And the construction also. This dome, I should point out, is cast all of aluminum, which is smelted in the UAE. The whole dome rests on 4 columns, which have gigantic ball bearings because it's a seismic zone. And the whole dome shifts in every direction just in case there's an earthquake. So here we have Brazil. This is Niterói, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Oscar Niemeyer. This is probably his most famous, of many famous works. One of my favorite buildings in the world. Falling Water, most of you know this. I chose to use a long exposure with this one simply because Falling Water is always packed with so many tourists that it's not really pretty to have tons of tourists hanging out looking at the camera and all this, so, you know, let's blur them out. This is a 4-minute long exposure, and it became a kind of beehive of activity, which is just a thing you see a lot, and it's something that I do a lot with my work. And I call this one the Ghosts of Falling Water. It's kind of a repetitive theme in my work. Back to details. At left here, I was actually on a walking tour in downtown Abu Dhabi, and I saw this office building with this yellow tinted glass. I had never seen a building this color. I didn't know something like this could exist. I thought, I have to get this. This is pretty cool. And we were walking by, and then I noticed that the adjacent buildings were kind of refracting and having a very interesting broken pattern. So I ran across some lanes of the highway set up in the median to shoot this. And this, like 90 West Street, is multiple exposures to get as much of the facade as possible. So these can be printed, you know, very, very large. And at right, we have some architectural details also from, at top is Dubai, the Etihad Museum, and at bottom is Masdar in Abu Dhabi. This is from my series, Gary's Children. You can see the entire series on my website. This series was kind of my first big hit, and I had never really had something kind of go viral before, but this was in 2011. It was a little easier to accomplish that. These days, there's so much work out there, and so many ways to access it. It takes more work for something to really. But this was published in Design Boom, and it had a huge readership at that time, so it just blew up. You can see here some prints of the work. So this was included in a retrospective of Frank Gehry's work in Tokyo at 2121 Design Site Museum, which was a great honor. Apparently the call came from Los Angeles, from Gehry Partners, and they had contacted the curator, and the curator called me saying, we have a request to include this series in our retrospective. And of course, I wasn't going to decline that. So here you can see kind of at right, he's looking at the work on the wall. Back to the UAE. We saw the interior, the oculus of the UAE pavilion. This is the exterior at night. Santiago Calatrava again. It's, everything was closed up. They had closed for the evening. I had closed for the evening. I had all my stuff packed up. And of course, especially with night photography, it never ends. There's always going to be that last shot that you have to set back up again. And you better do it, because you're going to think about it, and it's going to drive you crazy that you didn't take that one shot, and why didn't you take it? So you just do it. And so that was this. And then these two guys like sauntered in and were talking. I thought, this is perfect. This was great. It was worth it. This is Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. This is the Palácio do Itamaraty, Oscar Niemeyer again. This is early work. This is about 2012. This series documents the famous modernist buildings in the Brazilian capital. I chose to use color and also a lot of reflections in water. So like Gary's Children, this series kind of became viral. It was published in 11 different languages around the world, and that's a testament really to the esteem that especially the architectural community holds Oscar Niemeyer in. And he was very old at the time. It was a year before his death. I think he was 102, or he really had a long life. And so this got published in one of the main newspapers in Brazil. You can see it left here. This is Correio Brasiliense, the newspaper of the capital. And they did a full spread, and I heard from a curator after he had passed away that he had seen it in the newspaper, which... So this is a little bit more casual. I mean, this is as casual as I get. None of my work is really that casual. It's always kind of a formal composition, at least. I try and include the entire building. I don't cut things off. But at least we have street scenes here. We're delving more into capturing the life of the city. This is London, of course. And I decided towards the end of my stay in London that I wanted to do this type of work and capture some of the pubs, which was a lot of fun. They were having fun, I was shooting, but it was fun for me to watch them having fun. Here we have a close-up. So really in the close-ups you can see the life of the photo. I mean, people are hanging out. Of course, a lot of people looking at their phone all the time. People smoking, having a pint, coming in and out, and it's life. So if I go back to London, I'm definitely shooting more of these. So we're turning back to cityscapes now. This is all long exposure work. This is an 8-minute view. This is Dubai Marina. This is multiple 10-minute long exposures. This is 30 minutes of total exposure time. This is on the long end for me. And the only reason I would attempt this is because I had the most spectacular hotel room in the universe at that time, with a terrace so large you could land a helicopter, no joke. And they upgraded me because I pestered them from New York so much that they thought I was a psycho. And when I arrived, they didn't want to deal with me, and they said, "We upgraded you, Mr. Prokos." And I said, "Okay." And so nothing better than hanging out in your room, having a coffee and letting it expose for 10 minutes. So this photo ended up being exhibited at the Palm Springs Art Museum Modernism Week, and then it entered the permanent collection of the UAE Embassy. So this is the Cultural Diplomacy Department of the Embassy in Washington. And this one too. This is Sheikh Zayed Road. You might recognize some of these towers right about now, since we have drones blowing them up, unfortunately. This is multiple 8-minute long exposures. And I should point out here, this is not special effects. It's not the water filter in Photoshop. It's not mirroring or taking it from another image. This is just from the camera. Three exposures, 8 minutes each, 3 or 4. I don't have the exact. And the Hudson River is not usually this placid. It's really not usually this placid, but it was. So here we have New York again. These are 4-minute long exposures. This scene is actually much wider, much wider. I cropped it a little because it's kind of hard to see the detail with the dimensions of the screen. You can see a bit more what's going on here. Again, it's life. It's the life of the city. It was a beautiful day, like similar to today, and everybody was hanging out, and you get to see the dogs and the children and people eating a sandwich and people playing weird musical instruments you've never seen. And this guy left, which I don't really know what he's doing, but this one's a little more pensive. Once they get to the bridge, they start thinking about life. All right. So, as I mentioned before, I've used many different camera formats. This one is interesting. This is a 6x17 panoramic film camera. This shot, I was shooting chrome film. So this camera, I don't know, it's probably not very popular anymore, but it's basically just a box with a cone that you stick large format lenses on the front. Has no metering, no electronics, no film advance, nothing, zero. It's all on you. So you had to carry your own meter, you had to meter the scene, you had to focus by inserting a ground glass back. If it was daytime, you had to carry, you have to have a hood. Some of you, I'm sure, your students here, you're attempting large format photography, so this is the similar process. You have to load the film, unload the film, and trust me, I burned through a lot of film trying to learn this camera. It's not a cheap camera format, but once you master it, the results are unbelievable. So this type of work, I should say, here we have two. This is Cape Cod, by the way. Sorry, all of these are Cape Cod. This type of work, still going strong. I still have requests years and years later for all of my film, not all of it, but a good amount of my film stuff. So it's still kicking. All right, now we're going to turn to series. It's a completely different ball game. These series are more conceptual in nature, and they function as standalone bodies of work. I started working on this path, discrete series of work around 2011, and I really wanted to challenge myself a bit more creatively. So that's kind of the origin of all of these series. I was shooting for years, kind of the same stuff, and it was commercially successful, but not pushing yourself as a photographer is kind of the death of your career. At a certain point, after a certain number of years, you really have to get back in touch with what you're doing. Why did you start taking pictures? And so I was getting a little bored. I was getting a little antsy, and I thought I needed to get back in touch with my creative side. So that's what some of these series are. We'll start with Inverted. Inverted began as a series which revisits well-known locations in New York City, such as the Statue of Liberty, Times Square, Central Park, all the places we know and love. The aim here is to present places as a kind of new territory, one that strips the familiarity we have with these spaces and replaces it with a completely different reality. This is one of the few series I have that spans both film and digital capture. The earlier entries were all shot on film, and after a certain point, they're all digital. And I challenge you to try and see which ones are which. These are digital. These are all digital. Here you can see them. I had a small gallery space in Tribeca through the pandemic, and I showed only this work from my series, and a couple of the really big top seller, the cityscapes of Brooklyn Bridge and things, but I had mostly very large pieces. These are 60 and 72 inches from the conceptual series. So Inverted harkens back to my days of working with black and white negative film. I had a home darkroom in my little studio apartment on the Upper West Side when I was in my 20s. And I used to convert the entire apartment to a darkroom and spend all night printing. And so the bathroom was the wet side, and the one room that I lived in was the dry side. And I built baffles, and I baffled all the windows so that no light could come in. And that was my refuge. And I needed a refuge in my 20s. So this series may have a thoroughly contemporary look, but for me, it's a bit nostalgic. It brings back the memories of mixing the chemicals, working with the red light, the smell of the chemical baths, loading the film into the enlarger, that ghostly projection onto the easel, and of course, as many of you know who've worked in darkroom, finally getting to put it in the bath and watching the image emerge. People's response to this series is interesting and tends to be polarized. Some people absolutely love the stark black and white rendering, while others find it a little bit ominous. This is from film. This is Grand Central at rush hour. Happened to be an extremely busy rush hour that day. And two museum interiors, the Guggenheim and the Met. All right, on to the next series. This is Inverted UAE, which is, of course, tangentially related to the previous series in that they're both negative image series. This one in color. So this series was inspired by the modernist and futuristic architecture which I found in the UAE the first time I visited in 2019. The series portrays a kind of architectural wonderland through the use of bold color fields, repetition, and again, close-up views As with the black and white series we just saw, the intent is to shift the viewer's perception. And the surreal color palette pulls this away from representational photography and places it firmly in the realm of contemporary art. We're going to see some close-ups here. I like to show a lot of close-ups because it's not necessarily so easy to perceive what this is like if you're not standing there in front of it. The details really are helpful. So some of these views of modernist buildings offer just a glimpse of the lives of the inhabitants as well. They're occupied spaces, and that tends to humanize the series a bit. The balconies often have personal effects on them. Laundry hanging out to dry, exercise bicycles, baby strollers, and in one of these terraces there's even a little old man smoking a cigarette watching me shoot. And when looked at in the negative, they take on all kinds of beautiful hues and they become enticing and enigmatic, where it's definitely not in the positive. So one of the goals of presenting my work large is to draw the viewer in, to co-opt them into the scene. I want them to forget where they are, if possible, and to be enveloped by the image. And I should say something like this. This is pretty big, but this could easily be rendered at double this size. We had a limited space for this. This is my solo exhibition at Exposure Photo Festival 2022. This is called New Abstraction. It took from two series, the next series that we're about to see and this one. And these pieces were mostly 45 by 60 inches. This one is 55 inches. This is a modernist building in downtown Abu Dhabi. It's a residential building, very much lived in. And we're going to see here in the details. We have all kinds of curtains. One lady has the lace curtains, one lady has the sheer curtains. We've got the peeling paint, we've got the cracking concrete. These are lived-in spaces. These are not shiny new condos in Dubai. This building at right is also in Dubai. It's an interesting story that I was told by an architectural student, actually, that this shape, this arabesque shape, at this time period, it was a very conservative time in the UAE. They had kind of reverted back to. And they really wanted to push out Western influence in the new buildings and the architecture and return back to their own roots. And so it was mandated that all buildings had to have an Islamic motif. And so that's how you have these kind of arabesque screens that cover the terraces of the buildings. It's quite beautiful, actually. So this series, Inverted, was published in CNN Arabic, as Julie alluded to, Harper's Bazaar, Design Boom, and numerous other publications. And it was also awarded at the International Photography Awards that year and the Prix de la Photographie in Paris. Here we have some futuristic looking buildings. These are in Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai. With this kind of thing, I think a lot of photographers might ignore these types of buildings, especially Western photographers. And I just saw that, I was shooting them clearly not as negative, but that happened later. But there's a lot of creativity and whimsy in some of these buildings, even though they're office buildings. You don't see things like this in the West. I had never seen anything like this. So here we have extreme close-up views. These are all pretty tall towers, glass facades. Close-up, here we have some close-ups. All right, so over time I expanded this series to include some urban scenes and natural scenes. This happens to be the central bus depot in Abu Dhabi. It has a kind of Jetsons looking thing going on, especially that central waiting room. It looks like it's about to take off. This is a modernist architectural design that I thought worked really well, and it was indicated to me by another photographer, actually, that had shot it previously and said, you got to go check that out. Here we have, at right, Burj Al Arab, famous. I took this, this was a long exposure. I took this on the beach by my hotel, not intending to use it for this series, of course. It's beautiful on its own because it's a long exposure, has very delicate colors. But then when I saw it like this, I thought this was the true intent of this work. It's really cool. At left, you have something completely different. These are the date palms of Al Ain Oasis in Abu Dhabi. And an interesting thing about this, an aside, is that it uses an irrigation system that's 3,000 years old and still pumping water to feed all these date palms that are active date palms, producing beautiful fruit. It basically funnels the water from the surrounding mountains underground and keeps them alive. Sheikh Zayed Mosque, and this on the right is the Presidential Palace. These are in Abu Dhabi. I didn't shy away from religious architecture, and I don't. This is a view looking up at the two huge chandeliers. This mosque is like, it has to be seen to be believed. I mean, the scale of everything is huge, and the chandeliers are huge. So I couldn't miss that opportunity. And here we see them as artwork. So it's kind of a creative back and forth, you know? I went there, took the pictures, came back here, shipped the pictures back to there. So this happening, you know, this happens quite a bit. All right, on to the next series. This is Metropolis Abstracted. This is also, this is 2020 now. This series started during the pandemic, actually. It's a series of large-scale abstract photographs utilizing architectural details and elements such as building facades and reflections. But in this case, they're mirrored. So the series emerged by revisiting previously captured details, which I had in my archive. And as I mentioned, it was during the pandemic. So I had a lot of time on my hands. There wasn't a lot of work. New York City was empty. We were all kind of in the same boat. So I turned to my archive to say, well, what can I do? Let's find a project. And I had a lot of interesting architectural details that quite didn't make it on their own onto my website or anything. And I started working with those. And so pretty quickly I realized that they had the potential to become something interesting and unique when handled in this way. The goal for me with this series was to achieve something close to pure abstraction, non-representational images using architecture as the building blocks. And I should mention that I had really wanted to attempt abstract photography for years as a photographer, but you know, if I can't devote the time and I don't think I'm going to do it well, I just don't. I just keep postponing it. And I have finally had the time. And so also important for the students here, your downtime as a photographer is just as important as your working time, sometimes more so. That's the time that your wheels start spinning, you come up with your most creative work. That's always been the case for me. I've come up with stuff during recessions. So New York after 9/11, after the tech bubble popped, the financial crash, which was pretty brutal for a lot of people, and myself included, my business just kept ticking through it, and I kept coming up with new things. So these are the times when you are not crazy busy with your life and with your work that you can devote to the creative side. And you really should be using that time. Fairly quickly with this series, I began scouting for and capturing images specifically for the series rather than working from things from archive. Some of you locals may recognize some of these buildings, but it's not so easy. It's important to note that these compositions utilize one single image. It's not montage. The process of mirroring the image reveals complex relationships and symbolism that's often perceived in different ways by different viewers. So I wish I could say that was by design. I wish I could say I was that much of a genius that I could concoct something like that. But the truth is, it really only became apparent to me later on after people started viewing these. And they really are kind of Rorschach test. People come up with the most fascinating things that they tell you that you think, God, I never thought of that. And this person's like really perceptive. Mm-hmm. So this was awarded at American Photography and published widely as well. I should point out that there's a really great write-up of this if you have the inclination. It used to be in Wide Walls that got purchased by Artspur, and the writer's Ellie Onapor. It's called Breaking the Confines of the Medium. And she wrote an extremely perceptive write-up on this series, which blew my mind when I read it. So at the time of this exhibition, all of this work was brand new. So the exhibition was 2022. I was working on these from 2020. I was a bit nervous about the reception that I would receive since it was not straight photography. In fact, what kind of photography is it? I was still asking myself that question. So I was especially nervous because my show was right at the front entrance of the gargantuan Sharjah Expo Hall, which is like one of the biggest in the world. And I didn't know that until I arrived. And so you walked in, they placed me right at the left. Oops, sorry. And on the other side, on the right, was Steve McCurry. So I thought to myself, oh no, oh Lord, what are people going to think when they see this stuff right next to Steve McCurry's work, which is so famous as documentary work? It's more easily perceived. I mean, it's very, and so one of the other photographers that was having showed that year came into my space and said, "Are you the photographer?" I said, "Yes." And she's like, this is cool. And so immediately all of my anxiety went. It's the first time this has ever happened to me. I thought, well, you have validation from another photographer. It can't be that bad. Things are going to be okay. And it was great. So an interesting observation about this series, which I'll make quickly. The early pieces from New York, this New York, Boston, North America, we have kind of linear style architecture. And some of the pieces from New York, many of them have an Art Deco thing going on. This is an Art Deco motif. And so you could see it in a lot of the old buildings. I think the Channon building has these darts. These darts are very, and so in a weird way, the series kind of harkens back to some of the original motifs that you see in the city that the image comes from. The series is numbered, I should point out. I forgot to mention that. It's Metropolis Abstracted 1 through, I think it's 44. And this is number 32 at left. It's the most overtly romantic of all of them. I think you can see why. Is it Georgia O'Keeffe thing going on? Are they two faces? Is it sexual reference? That's all up to you. I find it to be very calming, very pleasant, very warm. It gives me a warm and fuzzy when I see this photo. Feminine, yeah, feminine. And so number 23 here at right is the opposite. It's it has this color contrast between the orange and the teal, and it looks like it's vibrating. Maybe more masculine, right? I don't know. This is number 24. This is an example of exploring texture in the composition. In this case, this is cedar wood. We're seeing curves creeping in. This is now, we're in the Middle East. These are close-up views. Here's another example of texture. This time we have highly polished metal. This was shot at night, and so you see the color of the lights creeping in on the sides there. And this one, for me, has Wizard of Oz. I keep thinking Wizard of Oz when I see this. I don't know why. Last but not least, this is number 33. This was taken in Abu Dhabi. It reflects kind of more muted color palette of the desert, and you have a convergence of lines from two buildings here going on, and just a bit of the pale sky blue in the back. All right, we're going to move on to landscapes now, Sylvan landscapes. This is tangentially related to Metropolis Abstracted, as you can see. It's a series of large-scale abstract photographs of trees and woodland canopies, and it uses the same mirrored compositions to reveal the underlying symbolism in organic subject matter as opposed to the architecture. This is Elm's Embrace. These are American elm trees. I decided at the beginning this was a numbered series, just like Metropolis. So it was, Sylvan Landscapes 1, 2, 3, 4, and I thought that's a little cold. And you really These trees are living creatures. I've always have a kind of weird thing about trees, even when I was a child. And I thought, you have to pay respect to these trees. You've got to include the species in the name. It adds a lot of interest to the series for people to know what species of tree they're looking at. It has a completely different character. So I renamed the entire series and included the name in it. Here you can see two extreme close-ups. This is Radiant Beech. It's a beech tree. I found it to be radiant because it looks like the light is emanating from the center of the composition. Just happened to be the positioning of the light kind of low when I was shooting this. Some of these compositions are single trees. Some of these compositions are different species of trees that are acting kind of in concert. Here's a close-up. So you can see when you start really looking at the details, you can really perceive a lot of things. This has a kind of sci-fi thing going on in this one. This is Eventide Canopy. This was taken right after sunset, it looks like, and it was later in the season and the branches were starting to lose their leaves. And so what you have here is a kind of vein structure that's running through the image, which I found interesting. Here you can see. Of course, this guy here on the left, that can be perceived in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people. This is Heart's Desire. These are elm and oak trees. You can see they're changing, the foliage is changing color at different paces. Some is still pretty green and some is already all the way to red. So it gives you this variegated color pattern, which is really nice. I didn't know what these trees were. I had to go back. I didn't take notes. Sometimes I do, but this one I didn't. I had to go back and use AI to, on extreme close-ups of the images, to try and pick out what the species was. This is Red Maple Mystic. This is a maple tree, and I found it mystical because this tree was very old, very gnarled, not particularly beautiful, going off in weird directions, knobs on the side, and yet it had the most spectacular flaming red foliage of anything that I had seen. It was unbelievable. And to me, it was like this tree was saying, I'm still here, I'm still kicking, I'm not going anywhere, and pay attention. And you can see here, there's, this is the center of the photo. Could be the heart of the tree, could be an animal nestled, sleeping. Gilded aspens. This is later. It was starting to get really cold. The leaves were gone. And so you only had these little tiny clusters of gold, already dry leaves that this reminded me of kind of a trompe-l'oeil that you would see in, in Paris or something. This is the only one that really has predominantly blue tones because the leaves are gone and the sky is there. All right, next series. Flux. Flux, completely different ballgame. This is a newer series, 2023. Flux centers on places where people flow through the scene, places of transit, commerce, culture, and worship. The element of time takes precedence in this series. This series is all about the flow of time. The series continues my years-long work with long exposure photography, but notched it up kind of to a new level. This is Flux Pontus. These are multiple images up to about 20-second exposures. So, I should point out, this series is composited work. I generally try and stay away from compositing. I find it to be such a workload that sometimes it tends to suck the joy out of the work. But I will do it in instances like this where, for example, you're getting a ton of people passing across this Millennium Bridge. And you might have one spot where you don't really like what people are doing or whatever. And you can take multiple exposures and fill it in as you will. So this is you can see it here. These people in the center were lifted from a completely different exposure and dropped in. So this is not necessarily 100% reality. It was very, very busy that day, but it's asynchronous. And everybody decided to wear this color that day. I don't, I didn't retouch it. I don't know, it must have been, the color of the season in London. This is Flux Subterraneous. Some of you, I'm sure, know Baker Street Station, the famous Baker Street Station. I really like this one. It's a little quieter, but it seemed to be that, maybe these are ghosts from the past of the station that are all occupying. This is what hooked me on photography, period. When I was an amateur, I was obsessed with long exposure and the effects that long exposure creates, and I still am. And so this is one of the most unique things of photography. Very hard to do this with painting. I mean, you can, but those painters are basically taking inspiration from photography. All right, this is Flux Pallatio. This is Buckingham Palace, of course, during the trooping of the colors. These are 4 2-minute long exposures, so 8 minutes of total exposure time here. So for this one, I wanted to be a little more accurate and divulge a little more information. I shot 36 images in total, and they range from 45 seconds to 2 minutes. Keep in mind, this is broad daylight, so some of you may be questioning, how do you do that? You have to use neutral density filters, so 8-stop, 10-stop, whatever is required, and you're basically working in the dark. You can't see the image, and so that's how you're capturing such long periods of time. For me, this series is not about Buckingham Palace. It's incidental. It's not about the trooping of the colors. That's incidental. It's about the people in the foreground. It's about the people across the way going crazy and having a good time, and the motion and the frenzy. This series really, the background, these historic buildings, these beautiful buildings, are just the canvas really for what the people are doing in front. Here you can see finally the trooping of the colors, and I don't know if you noticed, these are all little horse hooves, so all the horses are passing, in one long. This is Flux Regis, Regent Street. So I wanted to include the famous curve in its entirety. I don't really like to crop a lot. I try to, get as wide a scene as much as possible. You can see here again the tension between the static formality of the buildings, the old architecture, and the frenetic motion of the people in the foreground. And you can really see that in the close-ups. Here we have Flux Marmara. These are the Parthenon marbles, of course, in the British Museum. And here we have the people admiring them. This is Flux Naturalis. This is the Natural History Museum in London, which was new to me. I had never seen this building. It's the most unbelievable building. And of course, you have this blue whale suspended in the center, so it's a perfect backdrop to see the people. The people are in the background, and this whale is kind of center. These are the Italian gardens inside Kensington Gardens. This is a bit of a quieter, this is a more intimate view. People are captured here in contemplation. All right, so this is the last full series I'm going to present because we really didn't have, we didn't want to go over an hour, but there are additional series which I'm not presenting on my website. Namely, I should point out, this is Multiplicity. This I had intended to show, but I unfortunately chopped it from this. It was just getting too long. But if you have a chance, please go to the website and check out some of these. This was one of the signature images that we used in the promo, so I didn't want to leave it out, just in case you're wondering, what about that one? This is from Multiplicity, and it's all on my website. This is Archistrax, also on the site. Night and Day. Yeah, that's Athens, yeah. And this one is Architecture of Amusement, which is kind of a more fun, casual completely different vibe here. I just wanted to capture people having fun and suspended upside down and screaming, you know. And all right. So here we have finally reached photography commissions. I wanted to present some examples of my commercial work. It's a nice counterpoint to the fine art work, and it illustrates how the two types of work are not mutually exclusive necessarily, but they inform each other. These are photos from a very large commission shoot for Vornado Realty Trust, one of the big developers here in New York. And they commissioned me to capture the Penn District and all of Penn 1, Penn 2, Penn Plaza, the entrance to Penn Station, and Moynihan Train Hall, the Farley Building. That whole area was part of the deal. Commission work is challenging on another level from fine art photography. It really keeps you on your toes. It's beneficial to every photographer that because you learn to think quickly and resolve issues quickly on the spot. So when you're dealing with fine art photography, you have all the time in the world. When you're there on location, you don't. So it kind of, you know, it makes you move in a different kind of pace. You learn project management skills. You immerse yourself in their corporate culture for the duration of the project. And, you know, as photographers, we're kind of lucky because we don't have to stay in their corporate culture forever. We get to jump in and out and move on to another corporate culture. So here's the lovely library at Penn 1. I should point out this is a public space. If you're ever in that area and you have your laptop and you want a coffee and you just want a relaxed space to get out of the neighborhood and have some quiet, they don't really publicize this very much, but it's an absolutely beautiful, calm space. This is a staged view, of course. We worked with models. They would send down different sets of employees. I would call up, I'd say, send them down. You know, every day they would send down a different. And I always try to capture different perspectives as well, so that the client has different, you know, different layouts that they can work with. So this exterior of Penn 1 may seem simple. You may be wondering, why is he including this? Of course, nothing in New York is ever simple. So that's why I included this. For this shoot, you have two choices. You either, not just this shoot, pretty much every exterior shoot in New York, you either make your life a hell of retouching all of the cranes, the trucks, the people in front, the garbage dumpsters, the whatever that are covering the entire front of the building, or you clear it. And so in this case, I decided to enlist the security of the building and clear all of the trucks, everybody from the front of the building, which was no easy task. And you know, I got some abuse. I got a lot of abuse. My assistant got a lot of abuse. We even had one driver that was so pissed that he was asked to move from here to there, right out of scene, that he backed up and ran over all the cones to destroy them. In the end, though, I got my way, and the only retouching that happened here were the little orange cones marking the front. That's it. We didn't have to spend a huge amount of time in tedious retouching. So a good portion of your time in these architectural shoots is scouting for the best locations and arranging access as well. It requires planning the correct time of day to shoot, the angle of the sun. New York is really tough in this regard because you've got the sun passing through all the buildings and everything's clustered so tightly. New York is a challenge. The glass facades are tricky because they reflect the sun so intensely that it's often better to just shoot when the sun is behind the building or, you know, at another oblique angle. So lighting is, of course, very important in interior shoots. I try to work with the existing lighting as much as possible. I don't really like dealing with strobes and things like that unless the space is so dark that I have to. I know that's a big debate. I don't know how many of you are specializing in architecture, and some architectural photographers will fight you to the death that you must always bring, you know, lighting, that ambient lighting doesn't, it works perfectly fine in most cases. In this case, you can just composite. Take an exposure for the shadows and exposure for the highlights and merge them together, which is exactly what's going on here. One for the windows and one for the kind of the depths. And it works very well. Not always, but it works pretty well. I do walkthroughs of all the spaces if I can. I take pictures, I take notes. You mark the light to make sure that you're not, you might have to bring some lighting. Those pictures remind you of a lot of different things before you start the shoot. So, very important. Here we have two innocuous enough spaces. These are elevator banks. You might also be wondering, why is he showing us elevators? So here, in this case, the client went to great lengths to install these floor-to-ceiling LED screens, which show commissioned artwork on them. And the client is very proud of their artwork collection, which is interspersed throughout the building. And they consider one of the major benefits of being a tenant in the building is having this beautiful artwork. And so, of course, they want to capture it. They want to be able to show it off and say, look what a nice place you're going to work if you work in our building. And so that means that as the photographer, you have to find an interesting composition. You often have to sit and wait until you get people coming and going in a pleasing or visually interesting way. And a lot of times, you'll have to just take multiple. This one on the right, one shot, this one on the left is two different shots. The two people in the back were in one shot and the two people in the front were in another, and I just merged. You do a lot of that with commercial work. The client here asked me to shoot their outdoor space as well. I proposed a warm after-work cocktail kind of thing going on. Their rooftop deck there at Penn 2 is the most spectacular thing in New York, and of course it has these views of all panoramic views, every part of the city. And so it's a very large space. We had 14 setups in total to capture this space, and that all had to be done from the very late afternoon until the sunset. 14 different setups. So this required visiting the space the day before with my camera and my assistant and taking notes of every perspective. So every perspective was logged before the shoot happened. I knew what I was going to shoot before I started. You can't shoot 14 different things before sunset without having it worked out in advance. So my assistant would have the iPad, there was a spreadsheet, and we would put the number there and say, basically time it. And so during the day of the shoot, we put markers also on the ground. During the day of the shoot, what happens is the assistant's there, you're engaging with the client, you're engrossed in taking pictures. At one point I actually flew and fell on my face and everybody had to run over to, oh, pick up the photographer. And then, and my assistant's like, get up, come on, we got the next one. We have to hit 14 before we go home. The underside of the bustle here on Penn 2 is illuminated with LED lights that change pattern and color. So I wanted to use that. Well, we're seeing a little moire here, but anyway, you could see a little bit better here. I took multiple views because they have so many different interesting patterns. And I should say another funny aside, I've shot everywhere in New York over my 20 plus years of commercial shoots. And the Penn Plaza, this area in the public area of Penn Plaza, is the single most stressful location you can shoot in New York, other than Times Square, of course. Times Square, the middle of Times Square is pretty hectic, but that's full of tourists. And tourists coming to New York tend to be a little bit more deferential and respectful when they see photographers, and New Yorkers aren't. So New Yorkers are like, get out of my way. You try and put up a cone, you put up tape, whatever. So my point being here, not that New Yorkers are rude, it's that you better come armed when you do something like this. And you better know what you're getting yourself into. You have to either enlist security, which in this case didn't help me, or you have to block it off, or you have to have assistants to tell people to stop, or you just deal with it. Sometimes you just have to deal with it. And many years before, I did a shoot on the facing corner for HBO, and it was, I think, 12, 13 years before. It was the exact same situation. Here we have exterior views. I just want to point out, these require perspective control lenses. I don't know how many of you are really tall buildings in New York. You have to shift, you have to use create multiple exposures and then merge them later to get top to bottom. You don't want it cropped off. And I tried to create kind of a fun, jazzy vibe of New York with these types of buildings. I mean, they're office buildings. The one on the left is very cool, but the one on the right is an older office building. So you're trying to create some kind of very interesting thing going on. This Moynihan train hall, of course. The roof is a glass canopy. You don't have controlled lighting at all. So we had to do multiple sweeps here. You capture it from every angle that you can. We captured it also from the mezzanine, so the ground floor, the train hall, the mezzanine, and came back another day at a different time of day to capture the light when it was completely different than this. And so you're giving yourself options. It's really about giving yourself options to present to the client of what you like best. The client also wanted me to capture the different entrances of the building. Again, we have artwork. They're very proud of it. And the public artwork here is the dominant element. And I really didn't have to do that much because there's such a cool thing going on in the photo that I just wanted to capture how it interacts with the people below. The artists here are Elm Green and Dragset on the left, and Kahinda Wiley, the murals on the right. And last but not least, I just included a night shot of the same space. I shoot a lot of train stations, I have over the years, and I always love to see people coming and going, and I always wonder while I'm shooting, I wonder where they're heading to, you know? So that's it, that's the last shot. I just want to point out my socials here, just in case, or if somebody wants to reach out.
Yeah, hi, it's beautiful work.
Thank you.
I was curious to know whether you print your own work or do you job it out with a laboratory?
I do not print my own work.
And who do you use?
I've used many different printers over the years. These days I'm predominantly using Picto in New York, in Brooklyn. I've used Lamont, I've used Griffin Editions, I've used lots of different. Most of my work these days is going to Picto.
Even the very long, elongated one that you showed early on?
That one was just last week. That got shipped to Australia. The 96-inch, the kind of rosy Manhattan West Side, that just went to Australia. Yeah,
And what formats are you shooting and how much ND you're using?
Well, ND is a whole other discussion, but I'm shooting 100 megapixel medium format. And oftentimes, for example, that particular one, it's a good example. You're turning the camera and you're using it vertically and you're taking. And so that can be easily 250 inches, if not more. So it really is taxing to process some of this stuff, but it became necessary over time to capture it at the highest resolution and always ensure that you have it. So I'm always basically forced to work at these maximum resolutions, and people are looking for that. So the neutral density filters, was that the second question? Yes. 10 stops, 6 stops. I mean, it depends on the situation, depends on the effect you want to create. I do recommend buying the best ones. They're expensive as hell, but if you don't, you're going to get color casts, and that's not often pleasant, and it's very difficult to correct out. And of course, you want the best glass. You've got terrific glass in the lenses. You paid, an arm and a leg for the lenses. You want the best glass in front of the lens as well.
Nice. Hands up. Yes.
I was kind of curious with some of the fine art examples you showed doing long exposures in like the Natural History Museum. Did you bring a tripod in there, or how did you do those? Because I know it's
all
kind
this
of
work is tripod. There's nothing that I shoot with a tripod.
And then do you have to arrange beforehand to bring in tripods in these different spaces, or?
If I can, Metropolitan Museum, yes. Guggenheim Museum, yes. Some of the things in London, no, I didn't. And they seem to be a little less strict there than in New York. New York, you really can't get away with it. I mean, you get napped. If I can, and I have the time, and I can do it in advance, and in certain places that are very, very strict, you must. In other places, you can get away with it. I mean.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Alan. Don't let me down.
How big do the files get?
Oh, I think the last one that I was working on was 57 gigabytes or something like that. 58.
67?
57.
57,
Something.
58?
I'm just remembering this
You
off
haven't hit
the
a
top.
terabyte yet, have you?
No, no, no. I'm sure it's coming soon.
I stitched one together at one point, and it was going to be a terabyte. It was too
Oh
big
my
for the
God.
computer to handle.
Terabyte.
Yeah. It was from like 40 some odd different. No, it was more than that, I think. I can't remember.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense.
But the question I have is, there's some. I'm interested in your sense of saturation. There's a lot of it in them, and sometimes it almost looks to me like you're processing for individual sections to get the, like there was that one with the yellow flowers, and the yellow flowers almost look like they're separately masked and processed and have a real big bunch. It's all just, when you're dealing with saturation, you're just turning it up or
Well, I mean, in
globally
that case, you're
processing.
dealing with autumn foliage, so that's what they look like. This presentation and the screen is a little bit more bumped up than what it is in reality for some reason, so I wasn't sure how it was going to show on the screen here. It's a little less saturated in real life. It's situational. That series where you're talking about Sylvan, was it the big long spring landscape that you're referring to, or you're talking about the really bold autumn? The trees.
I noticed a lot of kind of, it's I'd have to look at the prints and kind of like talk about them.
Yeah.
But some of them seemed like the blues all were very blue, the yellows all were very yellow, and there wasn't this kind of like bleeding between the two of them.
I don't mask.
You
I
don't
really
mask at
don't.
all.
I really don't like to make my life a hell of Photoshop.
Yeah, I
just
can
don't.
understand that.
I just,
Since I do.
this is already very demanding work, and it's really situational on how I'll handle
Yeah. Anyway,
the color palette.
It's impressive as hell. So
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Good coming from
I
you,
think we
sir.
had one, couple.
Yes. This is just for our speakers as well.
You had mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe early on, and some of
Yeah.
your, like the close-up abstract stuff. One of the things that came to mind to me was Nude Descending a Staircase by Duchamp, the colors and just the way that it kind of like broke up. So do you think that your work, or would you say that your work is influenced more by painters than photographers?
It's a very interesting question. So look, early on, I didn't go to art school, okay? So my background was not in the arts, but when I moved to New York at 20, my parents were like, oh, you want to move to New York to go to grad school? Okay, fine, we paid for college, you're on your own. And so I had to get a job, and that job was as a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum. And at the time, I worked there for a couple of years, and it was the best education I could have ever had in my life. And so yes, very influenced by painting, very much so. And so I would say, not to diss photographers, I sometimes find photographers just a little limited in their frame of reference because they're only referencing photography. They often don't want to step out a little bit and look at other things. This series, we didn't see Multiplicity, sorry, but that's like Umberto Baccioni, 100%. And so that is my inspiration. That's what I'm thinking of. If I can try and, take that as a single inspiration. He was a futurist painter and sculptor. And when I was at the Met, they had a retrospective. I saw him again years later in Milan when I was living in Europe. So I take inspiration from lots of different things, and certainly painting, yes.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I was just curious. I'm one of the students here at the program, and I was just curious, like, if you were to do a self-portrait of yourself, which series of your photography would you use as the basis of that, for that self-portrait?
Well, of course. I mean, I think it would be something like what you saw at the Baker Street station, where I'm sitting in a little stool somewhere and moving around, and you're seeing all aspects of my face, The other ones really wouldn't be so flattering, like mirroring, let's mirror his, Greek nose. So I think it would be something long exposure like that. Yeah. Good question, though.
Are there architects you love? I mean, I love Zaha Hadid. I don't see her work in your stuff. Architects.
It is.
Okay.
It's there was
Or
one
Renzo,
right at the
Renzo
beginning.
Piano, Renzo Piano, or what do you call him?
I like Renzo Piano. He's not one of. I hope he's not going to watch. It's not one of my. He has, he has in Athens. He has the huge Niarchos Center, which is a very nice building, but it's just generally something that is not something that inspires me terrifically. Zaha Hadid, Björk Ingels, Jean Nouvel really does. I can take inspiration from any number of architects, really. I tend to really go for the flash a little bit, the Calatrava, the Zaha Hadid. I want my mind blown. And, architects themselves, that's not always their thing. But I'm not an architect, I'm a photographer. I need subject matter and I need, that is kind of what draws me in, so.
Thank you. Last one.
One last question with the technique. And the mirroring, are you doing that in post?
Yes, absolutely. So these are, I forgot to mention, you might be interested, I did talk to the global offices of Grimshaw Architecture last year, and it was a Zoom. And it's a 1 hour just on Metropolis Abstracted. Yeah, maybe a little longer than an hour. And it actually goes into what these look like before, the original source material, and what it looks like after. And so you should check that out. It's very revealing. And you really would probably never imagine where a lot of these buildings are or what they started out as. Because it's very mundane images to begin with. Little pieces, corners of buildings, things that kind of you'd never, and what they turn into is impressive.
Is that on your website?
It is. There's a video section on my website. It's also my YouTube channel, which I would always appreciate some followers on my lonely YouTube channel that nobody pays attention to. So, you can see it on my YouTube channel.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.